if it's a school day, if it's during school hours, 1/5 of the total American population consists of public school students K through 12. 1 in 5 Americans. And if you count teachers and administrators, you're probably going to get pretty close to 1/4 of the population of the country at any given time on a weekday is sitting in a public school building.
We all have memories of school. The games we played, the friends we met, the teachers who nurtured us, and the ones who imposed strict discipline. We learned how to spell, to read, to add and subtract. From generation to generation, for each era and individual, school has defined the shape of our young lives.
I cried the entire first day I was in kindergarten. I had to call my brother down to make me happy. And by the second day, I came home and said, I'm going to be a teacher.
Having the last name of Anderson, I knew the teacher would always call on me first. She'd get a roll book and said, okay, we have to spell these 25 words. Anderson, come to the front of the room. Spell all 25.
The football games were a big thing, and the cheerleaders were a big thing. I have a lot of very fond memories of my days in school. It was fun.
In school, we became aware of something larger than ourselves and our families. We became part of one nation. But school is also the place where we have fought important battles, not only about education, but about the meaning and practice of democracy itself. Born out of centuries of conflict, innovation, and experimentation, the American system of public schools is one of the nation's most significant and still unfinished achievements.
Most people believe that the idea that all Americans should get a free education at the expense of the government through high school graduation or possibly college was kind of written into the Constitution or was in the Declaration of Independence or some kind of founding principle of the country. Well, it's not. And that was a new, radical, crazy-seeming idea.
In the 13 colonies of pre-revolutionary America, only the larger towns in New England were required by law to build schools. Elsewhere, education was neither free nor public.
If there were schools at all, and many communities had them and some didn't, there were schools because people in a particular town or village or section of a county decided they wanted to get together and sort of pool their resources and hire a teacher. And thus you have the famous old stories about the teacher who was paid with 2 bushels of wheat and a half a cow or something like that.
Some colonial parents paid a fee to send their youngest children to dame schools.
If you've ever seen those wonderful pictures of a Mother Goose-like person with 3 or 4 kids clustered around her skirt, that's the romanticized view of the dame school. It's probably something between learning your letters and learning some discipline and having what wasn't called daycare, but in fact was.
Little children were given a horn book, a printed copy of the alphabet, and a short prayer, mounted on wood and covered with transparent cow horn. Most schooling was closely linked to the Protestant Bible, brought by early settlers to the New World.
In the Puritan colonies, one of the concerns was whether or not the people would follow the laws of the state and the Word of God and the Scriptures. So that in the teaching, there was a certain level of fear instilled in all children that if they failed to obey authority, they were damned.
A. In Adam's fall, we sinned all. B. Heaven to find, the Bible mind. C. Christ crucified, for sinners died.
The most common school book was the New England Primer, used by instructors to teach reading, and the Protestant Catechism.
What will be your condition in hell?
I shall be dreadfully tormented.
What company will be there?
Legions of devils and multitudes of sinners of the human race.
If you should go to hell, how long must you continue there?
Forever and ever.
Some older boys went to grammar school, where they studied mathematics, Latin, and philosophy. Only the most privileged had the means to continue on through college or university.
The major thrust of schooling was to preserve the status quo. 18th century schools were preparing children to take the place of their parents, to be like their parents.
By the time of the Revolutionary War, the vast majority of Americans were educated just enough to read the newspaper and the Bible and figure their taxes. Having won their independence from Britain, Americans rallied under the leadership of General George Washington. Ahead lay the difficult task of building a nation out of 13 former colonies. Many believed that schools could play a critical role. For Noah Webster, a teacher in Connecticut, the first step was to eliminate British textbooks from American classrooms.
For America in her infancy to adopt the maxims of the old world would be to stamp the wrinkles of old age on the bloom of youth. Begin with the infant in his cradle. Let the first word he lisps be Washington.
Noah Webster is often called the schoolmaster of America. He believed that there need to be a national history where we could feel that we had a unified culture. And this national history had to be built upon legends of the founding fathers. For instance, you needed to teach things about Washington cutting down the cherry tree so that you could create these national ideals.
In 1783, Webster published a textbook known as the Blueback Speller. It was designed to teach students about the United States and its inhabitants.
America, American, Americans. Boston, Bostonians.
Webster's speller promoted a new national language to be spelled and pronounced differently from British English. The Speller became America's textbook. It sold millions of copies over the years and was a forerunner to Webster's American Dictionary of the English Language.
Preach a crusade against ignorance. Establish and improve the law for educating the common people. General education will enable every man to judge for himself what will secure or endanger his freedom.
To leaders like Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, the survival of the democracy depended on educating all Americans.
Jefferson said that And in a democracy, the people vote and choose their rulers. And that means you have to learn to read and write, and you have to learn enough of the foundations of education to be a citizen.
Jefferson had received the type of education available only to the wealthy of his time. Privately tutored as a child, he later graduated from the College of William and Mary. In 1778, as a member of the Virginia Assembly, he drafted a proposal to guarantee 3 years of public schooling for all children, with advanced education for a select few.
Jefferson's idea was a little bit of universal education with two purposes. One, to give people the democratic basics, and two, to be a kind of staging area or an audition site for this small group of natural aristocrats who would then be given a full-dress university education and then serve the country as he had done.
As Jefferson put it, raking a few geniuses from the rubbish and giving them scholarships to go on to secondary school and then to the university, of having a meritocracy in which the most able people could be educated at public expense up to a high level.
Jefferson didn't consider the possibility of female geniuses. His plan allowed 3 years of schooling for girls, enough to prepare them for marriage and motherhood. And he offered no education to slaves. For slaves, education was often a hidden and dangerous undertaking.
There was a sewing school where the children came to school ostensibly to learn sewing, and they would sit and they would sew, but of course underneath that material would be the textbooks. And so even during slavery, at risk of life, people were interested in trying to attain this magical something that we call literacy.
Notwithstanding his views on blacks and women, Jefferson's ideas about education were considered radical. Virginia assemblymen scoffed at the notion of sending farmers to college.
It is a great mistake to suppose there is more knowledge or utility in philosophy than in the agricultural or mechanical arts. Take away the food of man, and his existence would cease. Take away his philosophy, he would scarcely know it was gone.
3 times between 1779 and 1817, Jefferson's bill for the more general diffusion of knowledge came up for a vote. Each time it was defeated.
There is a snail-paced gait for the advance of new ideas. People have more feeling for canals and roads than for education.
Taxpayers had just gone through a revolution against taxation without representation. The state was broke, and so they were just very resistant to any kind of new function of government that would cause taxation. And they were leery, I think, about state regulation of something that was as local as education.
Jefferson continued to push for public schooling, even as he served as Secretary of State, Vice President, and finally as President. His final educational battle led to the creation of the state-supported University of Virginia. But his most powerful legacy was the argument that public education was essential to democracy.
If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be.
In the 1830s and 1840s, Jefferson's dream of statewide school systems began to take root, most notably in Massachusetts through the work of a reformer named Horace Mann.
Agitate, 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 but nevertheless in a proper way and for a good cause only.
Horace Mann was a consummate politician. He was the majority leader of the Massachusetts State Senate. And he had cut his teeth on Whig politics, which meant you intervene as a state to develop the economy of the state, to build institutions. So when Mann was asked, will you be the first Secretary of Education, he thought it was completely consistent with his Whig principles, and he thought it was an idealistic thing to do.
It's very interesting how Horace Mann has become our paragon for the promotion of public schools. It's sort of a hard thing to understand because he had no authority in this office as Secretary of the Board of Education. I think what he perhaps did endear himself to people in the 19th century over was his riding horseback from district to district, reviewing the actual physical facility.
In 1837, Mann found a system built on inequity. Schools varied widely from town to town. They were supported by local taxes and by fees charged to parents. Wealthy children could stay in school longer. The poorest couldn't afford to go at all. Mann visited 1,000 schools over the course of 6 years and wrote detailed reports on their physical condition.
The schoolhouse in District Number 3. How shall we speak of that? Clear away the surrounding forest, which protects it, and before the next gale is over, the foundation stones would be all that remain of it. Already aware of the danger, the mice have forsaken it.
Rural district schools were out of shape and they were in disrepair. And the typical one didn't look as romantic and as lovely as a red painted schoolhouse out in a meadow. But some of the other things that we know from mythology about those schools turn out, in fact, historically to be true. There were kids of all ages, from very, very young up to the age of the teacher. All the kids are doing different work at the same time, and the teacher had to be kind of a ringmaster to keep all this activity going.
Diminish, dissenter, distemper, distinguish.
School children spent hours sitting on hard benches, memorizing or reciting passages from books they'd brought from home, no matter how outdated or irrelevant. One book on penmanship devoted an entire page to the proper writing of the letter O at a 53-degree slant. A geography text described a sea serpent found off the New England coast.
The materials were incredibly inadequate. The reading books were awful. And teachers had no training, and they turned over very rapidly.
The males who taught were often men who couldn't do anything else. I think if you fell off the hay cart and hit your head a few too many times, you might have turned out to be the person who was teaching older kids in the village school.
Climbing up a tree, 1 lash. Blotting your copybook, 2 lashes. Not saying yes, sir, and no, sir, 2 lashes. Coming late to school, 4 lashes. Boys and girls playing together, 4 lashes. Drinking spirituous liquors, 7 lashes. Misbehaving to girls, 10 lashes.
The state took better care of its livestock, Mann concluded, than of its children in school.
You crowd from 40 to 60 children into that ill-constructed shell of a building, there to sit in the most uncomfortable seats that could be contrived, expecting that with the occasional application of the birch, they will then come out educated for manhood or womanhood?
Public schools had gotten very bad, and people weren't supporting them, and many people were leaving public schools for private schools. And he wanted to change the public schools, make them better, and make them so good that everyone would want to use them. So he was a great crusader for public education. He was the one who said government has to do it.
From Cape Cod to the Berkshires, Mann held a series of public meetings to promote a new system of what he called common schools. They would teach a common body of knowledge that would give each student an equal chance in life.
It is a free school system. It knows no distinction of rich and poor. It throws open its doors and spreads the table of its bounty for all the children of the state. Education, then, beyond all other devices of human origin, is the equalizer of the conditions of men, the great balance wheel of the social machinery.
That equalizing capacity of the school was something that he very much believed in, and he articulated more than anyone else the idea that the common school, and this new word for the district school, became for him the place where we make Americans. This is the place where we all come together, elite and poor. That's what's common about it.
Common schools would be free of charge so that poor children could attend. They would be of the highest quality to draw wealthier students away from private schools. And the system would be entirely funded with tax dollars. Mann's plan was instantly and vigorously opposed.
Critics of Horace Mann in Massachusetts tried to get him ousted. A lot of people said, we're not used to being taxed for schooling. We don't think it's a taxable issue. We think it's something that the users ought to be paying for. And we don't want you meddling in our local schools, which we think are fine. They didn't want state control.
If you go back and read the history and you know, go read Horace Mann's writings and so on, it impresses on you the precariousness of this basic idea that we take for granted, that all citizens have an obligation to reach into their wallet and pay for children to be educated, even if it's not their own children.
Mann gained a wider audience through the annual reports he wrote while serving on the Board of Education. He recommended many of the things that we associate with school: chairs with backs, a blackboard, standardized textbooks.
His first major report emphasized the school building and what it should be like. So he standardized like crazy all aspects of the common school.
Mann was read and debated from New England to the Southwest, from Europe to South America. His ideas on school reform made him one of the most influential writers of his time.
He got state bureaus of education, he got teacher training, at least he got more teacher regulation. He got free, most importantly, free tax-supported education for all the kids in the northern states.
Horace Mann is rightly the patron saint of public education, not because of what he always managed to accomplish in Massachusetts, but because of what he said in those reports. He talked about the public schools having this leveling effect, that merit should be able to rise. There's a deep connection between Mann's vision and Jefferson's. Both of them disliked the idea of the family you were being born into determining how you ended up in American life.
In the United States, there is no nobility. Every citizen is equal in civil and political rights. The son of the poorest man in the country, if he attends to his learning, may become president.
Even as the common school movement got underway, conflict arose over the question of religion. Growing numbers of immigrants were arriving from Europe. By 1840, nearly half of New York City residents were foreign-born. Many were Irish Catholics. They were generally poor and desperate for an education. Yet in New York, they found that the public schools, while free and open to all, were effectively Protestant.
All the Protestant sects could feel very comfortable in American public schools. If you read Horace Mann, you'll see that his idea was we should have no sectarianism in the schools. We should all read the same Bible. We should all say the same prayers. We should use those religious ideas that are common to all of us, meaning all of us Protestants.
Irish Catholic children were being expected to attend schools where the King James Bible was read, where Protestant hymns were being sung, where prayers were being recited, but most importantly, where textbooks and the entire slant of the teaching was very much anti-Irish and very much anti-Catholic.
The Irish in general are brave and hospitable, but passionate, ignorant, vain, and superstitious.
There are statements in public school textbooks in the time that would just astound you today. Catholics return from communion invigorated for the perpetuation of new offenses. The Irish immigration has emptied out the common sewers of Ireland into our waters, and so forth.
At Old St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, Bishop John Hughes launched a protest. A 43-year-old Irish immigrant known as Dagger John, Hughes was fierce and uncompromising.
We are unwilling to pay taxes for the purpose of destroying our religion in the minds of our children. That such books should be put into their hands is unjust, unnatural, and intolerable.
Bishop Hughes felt that the Catholic children in those schools would be subjected to an indoctrination into the Protestant faith, and he was right.
And that created a situation in which some 20,000 children were running the streets of New York without benefit of education because they refused to be part of a system biased against themselves.
These children deserved their own schools, Bishop Hughes said. He demanded that the public school society, the Protestant civic leaders in charge of education, make city funds available for Catholic schools. When Jews and Presbyterians also asked for funds, city leaders agreed to hold a debate.
The great school debates in New York City in 1840 were amazing if for no other reason than, one, they packed the galleries. This was great entertainment for all of New York City. But more significant in that it was one man against a whole army. Different ministers of different denominations kept spelling one another and coming after Hughes, and hour after hour, evening after evening, he would stand up and rebut them.
We will not send our children where they will be trained up without religion, lose respect for their parents and the faith of their fathers, and come out turning up their noses at the name of Catholic. In a word, give us our just proportion of the common school fund.
The debate continued in the press, where many readers spoke out against public funding for religious schools.
Once we admit that the Catholics have a right to a portion of the school fund, every other sect will have the same right. We shall be convulsed with endless jarrings and quarrels about the distribution of it, and little left for the public schools.
The Catholics have a right to think and worship in their own way, but have no right to claim 1 cent of the public money to propagate their own faith.
One of the first principles of American freedom is to keep separate and distinct the institutions of church and state.
The city denied Bishop Hughes' request. Controversy over the use of the Protestant Bible in the public schools escalated nationwide. The Philadelphia Bible riots of 1843 left 13 people dead. The Catholic Church was burned to the ground.
We have to recapture the extent to which anti-Irish feeling and to some degree other ethnic slurs were really racial. People talked about the Irish as a race. The feelings were very akin to what we call racism today.
But change was underway. After the City Hall debates, New York principals were ordered to search through textbooks for passages offensive to Catholics, which they painstakingly removed by hand. 2 years later, the Public School Society was replaced by the New York City Board of Education, an elected body. Growing numbers of Catholic children enrolled. Meanwhile, John Hughes was named Archbishop of New York in 1850 and used his considerable power to help create a national system of Catholic schools. It became the major alternative school system in the United States.
Hughes's goal was to have a school system that didn't erase religion, but that had a lot of religion. It had to have the Catholic religion. The public school strategy from Plymouth Rock to today has been on issues of religion to try to diffuse them by just doing less and less religion. And so if you're a member of a group that says, no, 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 the whole curriculum has to be suffused with some distinctive religion, not some mushy general moralisms, but my religion, then the public schools don't know how to respond to that.
The issue of religion took its place alongside other crucial issues facing the architects of public education, most notably the issue of race.
The black place represents Africa. The people are black. They are also very ignorant of books and learning and destitute of true religion. For many centuries, it has been the practice of other nations to use them as slaves. Millions of them have been brought to America.
In the years just prior to the Civil War, 2/3 of African Americans lived in the South, most of them as slaves. There, efforts to become educated were harshly punished. In the North, going to school was not a crime, but many blacks were forced into schools that were segregated and poorly funded.
It became clear to most of them that a better education did not mean a better position in society or a better job because of their race. And therefore, it always raised the question for them, education for what? And I think the answer for African Americans was that they began to tie the quest for freedom and the quest for education and excellence together. And so they began to think of education as part of a freedom struggle.
In the 1840s, black school children in Boston were still restricted to 2 primary schools, both segregated. Parents and reformers gathered at the African Meeting House to debate strategies for protest. They were encouraged by an escaped slave and noted abolitionist named Frederick Douglass.
The point we must aim at is to obtain admission for our children into the nearest schoolhouse and the best schoolhouse in their own neighborhoods.
In the winter of 1846, a group of nearly 90 African Americans drew up a petition to the Boston School Committee. It called for an immediate end to segregation in the city's public schools.
The establishment of separate schools for our children deprives us of those equal privileges and advantages to which we are entitled as citizens.
These separate schools cost more and do less for the children. We therefore earnestly request that our children be allowed to attend schools in the districts in which we live.
In response, the school committee investigated the state of the black schools. They found the largest, the Smith School, in dangerous need of repair.
The schoolrooms are too small, the paint much defaced, the apparatus so shattered it cannot be used.
Despite the report, no action was taken. Soon afterwards, 5-year-old Sarah Roberts was assigned to the Smith School. Her father, Benjamin Roberts, made a bold move. He tried to enroll Sarah in a better school closer to home. Her application was denied because of her race. Roberts then tried the other 4 schools that Sarah would pass on her walk to the Smith School. At each, she was refused admission. Once, she was physically ejected by a teacher. Members of the school committee defended segregation, claiming that it was maintained for the special benefit of colored children.
In the case of colored children, we maintain that their peculiar physical, mental, and moral structure requires an educational treatment different from that of white children.
Outraged, Roberts vowed to sue the city of Boston, naming his daughter Sarah as plaintiff. Some African Americans opposed his efforts, arguing that integration was not the answer.
Integration would bring colored children into competition with more advanced and wealthy white children. This would result in sneers, insults, assaults, and jeers.
What kind of education would our children receive from a white teacher? The Smith School should simply hire a black teacher with a college degree.
There were many people in the African American communities who simply said, we don't have a ghost of a chance to achieve integrated education. And so let's develop a full-fledged quality system of education, even though it's segregated. And then there were others who said, we cannot accept this position in society because we would be doomed forever.
With the majority in favor of integration, Roberts filed his suit. By 1849, the case reached the Massachusetts State Supreme Court. Representing Roberts in court were Robert Morris, one of the nation's first African-American lawyers, and abolitionist lawyer Charles Sumner.
The school is the little world in which the child is trained for the larger world of life, beginning there those relations of equality which the Constitution and the laws promise to all. I conclude that there is but one kind of public school, free to all, whether rich or poor, whether Catholic or Protestant, whether white or black, excluding none, comprehending all.
Chief Justice Lemuel Shaw ruled against Sarah Roberts. Undeterred, Roberts and a group of supporters called the Negro School Abolition Society took their cause to the state legislature. In 1855, a law was passed abolishing segregation in the schools of Massachusetts. It was the first such law in the nation. The Roberts case would echo throughout history. In 1896, the Supreme Court cited Judge Shaw's decision when it permitted segregation on the grounds that separate could be equal. In 1954, the Supreme Court cited Charles Sumner in Brown versus the Board of Education, the case which finally launched the desegregation of American public schools.
Roberts, they were the dreamers. They were the ones who believed in America that was hard to imagine, an America without race discrimination, America in which all people, irrespective of race, creed, or color, would have equal access to public institutions, public places. They were dreamers.
The American Civil War ended in 1865. 4 million Americans, formerly slaves, were now free to become literate.
Reconstruction was, as Booker T. Washington described it, an entire race trying to go to school. There wasn't anybody too old or too young that didn't feel as though he or she couldn't benefit from some level of schooling. And it was seen as the most valuable undertaking, the notion of going to school.
The Western states. The greater part of these states now contain a vast number of white inhabitants, and thousands of people are every year emigrating to this land of plenty.
Across the new states as they were created in the Middle West and the Plain States and then the far Pacific coast, the states talked forever about education as an essential feature of creating a brand new government. After the Civil War, the Congress actually required states to guarantee in their Constitution that they would offer a free, non-sectarian education to all children.
As people migrated, they founded their own towns. They invested their money in those locations, and then they hoped that their town would be a success and be more a success than the neighboring town. So it was important to them to have something to offer settlers and attract them. And a school was a very important institution that they could offer.
On the frontier, families were widely scattered. Some school districts covered 1,000 miles. Getting to school could take grit, determination, and at times, ingenuity. In wealthier settlements, schools were built as ornaments to success. More often, classes convened in sod dugouts, defunct saloons, and wherever space was available. In this vast territory, with new schools cropping up everywhere, a crisis arose. Who would teach the children of the settlers?
All these school boards are saying, quick, let's get women teachers. Why? They're cheap. They're cheaper. And it was just universally the argument. Every once in a while you'd hear this caveat, but they're also good with little children.
Advocate Catherine Beecher promoted female teachers as a civilizing force in the West. A member of a prominent New England family and sister of author Harriet Beecher Stowe, Catherine Beecher saw teaching as a woman's moral calling.
God designed women to be the chief educators of our race. It is woman who is fitted by disposition and habits and circumstances for such duties.
Beecher founded colleges to educate women and train them for service out west.
Catherine Beecher really made teaching respectable for middle-class women. She was an elite person who advocated that this was really a very appropriate behavior for a young woman, to leave her family and go and live in another community and board around as a teacher. This was not necessarily what a respectable young woman who wanted to make a good marriage would think to do.
Determined and educated, an army of young women teachers headed west. But nothing could have prepared them for the conditions they found upon arrival in their lonely outposts. One young lady witnessed a gunfight outside her classroom. Another found herself boarding in a 2-room cabin with a family of 10.
Nearly all the people are kind to me, but have not had an opportunity for improving their minds. So they are very ignorant. Many of the adults can neither read nor write. Some cannot tell one letter from another. And so it is with the children. Ellen P. Lee, Hamilton County, Indiana.
There are many openings in the walls of our school that admit birds, lizards, mice, and snakes. During one lesson, a snake appeared in the opening above a window, sticking his tongue out at us. I disposed of him amidst great applause. Ethel Ha Basquette, Tulare County, California.
Catherine Beecher argued for female teachers in terms of a great national need. 15 years later, she said, you know, I told people that that was the purpose, but what we were trying to do is create a profession for women. And it'll be a profession for women that'll be as great as medicine or law for men.
It also created a new ethic in schools that was feminized, in which the teacher cared for the students. The teacher was not only a disciplinarian, but also offered not exactly maybe the comforts of home, but a lot of the similar ingredients that had gone on in homeschooling a century before that.
In their classrooms, such as they were, women teachers gave children on the remote frontier an introduction to literature, standards of behavior, and national ideals. They relied on a series of textbooks written expressly for the children of the West. McGuffey's readers eventually sold over 122 million copies.
The McGuffey readers consisted of moral tales. And the idea was that while the students learned how to read, they would learn the morality that would be this common morality of society. And that is the idea that you should work hard and acquire wealth. Then you're blessed by God.
Charlie and Rob. Don't you hate splitting wood? Asked Charlie. No, I rather like it, said Rob. It's a tough job and it's nice to conquer it. Now, which of these boys do you think grew up to be a rich and useful man? And which of them joined a party of tramps before he was 30 years old?
Capping off the school year in towns throughout the country was the annual spring exhibition. Parents and friends gathered to review the work of America's teachers and the lessons being taught. By this time, students had to master a great deal more than the 3 R's. There was physiology, an old-fashioned term for health and hygiene, not to mention biology, zoology, and even ichthyology for the upper grades. A favorite event was the spelling bee. Standing before a rapt audience, students competed fiercely over the spelling of exotic words.
Argillaceous, of the nature of clay.
A-R-G-I-L-L-A-C-E-O-U-S. Argillaceous.
Tetrastone, a 4-sided court with porticos.
T-E-T-R-A-S-T-O-O-N. Tetrastone.
Acephalous, without a head.
A-C-E-P-H-A-L-O-U-S.
Correct.
By 1890, the U.S. was providing more schooling to more children than any other nation on earth, thanks in large part to the 19th century movement for school reform.
The result, of course, is free, tax-supported education. That's not a small matter, and I think it mattered in kids' lives. But there was all kinds of discrimination in the system, and so to say it was progress is not to deny all the failings.
While a majority of American children attended public school, they didn't all go to school together. Many Native Americans were sent to special government schools, where they were forced to abandon tribal languages, customs, and dress. African Americans also faced exclusion, and some created their own schools. Black literacy soared from 5% to 70% in the decades after the Civil War. The great American experiment of universal education was well underway, inspired by Thomas Jefferson, promoted and refined by Horace Mann, Catherine Beecher, and others. America's public schools offered great promise for all. It remained to be seen how that promise would be met as schools faced the enormous challenges of the 20th century.
School was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Ford Foundation, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the Edna McConnell Clark Foundation, and by grants from the following: and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.